All right, well, thanks for joining us for the Weekend Extra. My name is Josh, and we got Pastor Joe with us here, and we just listened to the sermon on insecurity. And it was great. And something I was thinking, Joe, is just insecurity is going to happen, and all these emotions and feelings are going to keep happening. We expect them to enter into our life. But how can we be preemptive, almost on the front end of that entering our life? How can we be ready to engage it and enter those seasons when we kind of see them coming ahead?
Yeah, Josh, that's a really good question, and I'm feeling really insecure about my answer.
Right, yeah.
No, I think it's so important whenever we can, spiritually speaking, and then practically speaking in how we navigate our life, to kind of prepare ourselves to be ready at kind of any turn. We need to have this idea and this understanding that life can throw curveballs at us at any given point in time. And so how are we going to respond to those as opposed to always thinking, how am I going to react to the situation? And one of the things that I think is paramount for this is this idea that we get in Ephesians 6 where we're challenged to put on the armor of God. And sometimes we can think of this almost like a silly metaphor because put on the helmet, and we'll walk through a couple of these, but put on the breastplate, and it's okay, ha ha ha. But when you really think about the elements that Paul is trying to walk through and what we need to make sure is a firm foundational piece to how we interact with God, and he really sets it up because he says in verse 12, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Not everything that comes at us, not everything that makes us insecure is just my receding hairline or just my inadequacies that I think I have versus someone else. Sometimes it's actually spiritual.
Absolutely.
Satan and his armies are actually, they're little whispers that we might think are thoughts. And where did that thought come from? Well, there's a chance that's a part of the spiritual reality that's happening with us. And it could also be through different messagings that we see. We're watching something on TV, we're watching this ad on YouTube or whatever, and we're suddenly locked into that concept, and it begins to build kind of a little mountain of foundation in our brain that suddenly feeds our insecurities. And so Paul is really locking into this fact, you have to be on guard about this. And he says then in verse 13, therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, when you're attacked, you may be able to stand your ground after you've done everything to stand. And so we want to be ready to engage that insecurity, because by going through it, by asking God to lead us through it, walk us through it, and begin doing that, that's what begins to wash the insecurity away, as opposed to just completely crippling underneath its weight. And then so he says, stand firm then with the belt of truth buckled around your waist and the breastplate of righteousness in place. And that's understanding that Jesus has completely instituted his righteousness into us. When we think we're not good enough, when we think that we don't have what it takes to do what God has called us to, we have to understand the truth of who we are in God, and that his righteousness is given to us. It says, then fit your feet with readiness that comes with the gospel of peace. Right there, even in the guarding passage, he's encouraging us to get ready to move. That this peace that God will give you is right there available for us. And then in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, understanding that I trust in who God is and what's going to come against me. I trust that God has my back. I trust that God is the one leading me through this. And then take on the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. I can't emphasize enough that we will never be prepared enough to go through these insecurities together if we're not regularly interacting with God and his word. We have to know what the truth is. We have to know what his thoughts are, how he would lead in real time, and to be able to engage in his word, seek his heart, go after him and say, God, how are you pulling me up out of this pit? That's where we can really latch on to it. And so if we want to be prepared for these moments when they come, whether they're subtle little things or head over heels feeling overwhelmed things, we have to engage God. And I think that if we take time to really pray through this passage and then hit some of these habits, we'll be so much more set up to be ready for those moments.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And kind of what I hear you saying is in the broader context of Ephesians 6 that it's not necessarily that you're going to walk out of the house one day and Satan's going to jump on your back.
Right.
But evil is very much active, and whether
Yep.
that's believing lies, because evil's active, I must be active.
Yes.
And remembering truth and putting on that armor like
That's
you were
great,
talking
Josh.
about. Yeah. And actually being proactive because we know it's coming, right? We know it's active.
It's coming. You're right.
Very
Absolutely.
awesome. Well, thanks for being with us for the Weekend Extra, and check out more of what we got if you'd like.